But going back, so we were talking about the substrates, and then we got onto briefly got onto the subject of, you talked about bumblebees, you talked about solitary bees. Let's dive into that a bit more, because again, I think perhaps for perhaps the uninitiated, when we think about wildlife, people just think about honeybees, think about butterflies, but let's dive into that a bit more, because you've talked about the substrates and how, again, the biodiversity of the plants is increased. But you were just touching on earlier about, you know, how many different invertebrates that are also interact with this substrate.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if we're going to talk about solitary bees, for instance, I mean, there's a few amazing facts about solitary bees in contrast to honeybees. I mean, I guess everyone thinks of a bee, they think often of a honeybee, which is in effect is a farmed thing. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, and it has its place, I guess. But solitary bees are they are our native bees. There's 250 species of them. And what I like about them, what's amazing about them, is how efficient they are at pollinating our flowers. So honeybees are efficient at packing pollen onto their hind legs to take it back to the hive, which is great. This is what they need to do, right? But that means that less pollen gets dumped on the next flower. Whereas solitary bees, for one reason or another, I don't know, evolutionary wise, they're just incredibly messy. So they fall into one flower and the pollen gets all over them, and then they just blunder into the next one. And so they're up to 200 times more efficient at pollinating flowers than honeybees. So that's an incredible figure. We kind of lose sight of that. And because they're solitary, obviously, you don't notice them. I didn't notice them 20 years ago, for sure. So they're not so glamorous. They're not so they don't give us anything, right? I mean, mankind as it is, you know, we love things that we get stuff back from, don't we? So these things fly thousands of miles, and then we take all their good stuff and give them a bit of sugary stuff, you know, I mean, fine, but you know what I mean? So solitary bees are amazing. But the thing is with solitary bees is there's a big proportion of them, they won't fly miles from where they breed, right? They're very short distances. So you know, you can have as much pollen and nectar as you want in your garden, but unless you've got a breeding space, you will not get that solitary bee. That's why there's no solitary bees in the middle of arable fields, even if there's a bit of rape out there and there's food out in the middle of the field. They're too far from their breeding space. Yeah. So it seems to me that most urban and suburban areas are pretty good now, or getting better for pollen and nectar. Yeah, I'd say. What they're missing is somewhere to breed. So you know, I think that's what's actually the restrictive thing at the moment is the breeding space. So you've got two things. You've got your hole nesting bees, your aerial nesters, and your ground nesters in solitary bees. And we all know about the hole nesters because you can buy bee hotels and you can drill holes in wood, which we obviously do, and that's great. But to get the ground nesting bees, which is the large proportion of solitary bees, you've got to have somewhere for them to nest in. And they generally, this is not all, but they generally like warm, sheltered, sandy substrates. Now, and they generally like it to be fairly sparsely vegetated, this substrate. So they're relatively fussy. You know, that's why you tend to see them down the sides of paths often, where we've trod the path and kept the vegetation back. You often get solitary bees there. So the whole idea of substrates and where we are here, we're on heavy clay where we live. So we had very, very few ground nesting bees, because there's a few that like little nesting heavy clay, but not very many. Now, as soon as we started dumping sand here, bearing in mind we're a mile from the sandy soil here, as soon as we started dumping sand, within months, solitary bees that we'd never seen before were nesting. You know, so we would, no matter how many flowers we'd have grown, we'd have never got those unless we'd have provided them a breeding space. So again, that's another reason to look at substrates. So substrates, then that's another dimension to soils and substrates. What breeds in them? What's happy in them? And you can pull in. I think we're up to about 15 or 16 bee species now, solitary bee species that have come in on the back of us dumping bits of sand here that we didn't have before.